Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be chatting about the Canada carbon tax rebate being deposited into bank accounts, income inequality hitting record levels in the country, a mutiny starting within the Liberal Party against Justin Trudeau, the federal government expelling Indian diplomats for alleged involvement in crimes on Canadian soil, a pro-Palestinian organization being labeled a terrorist group after declaring death to Canada as its goal, and the ongoing struggle against hopelessness.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They are 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got Canada carbon rebate payments. Justin Trudeau, Stephen Guilbeault, and other Liberal MPs flooded social media with announcements urging Canadians to check their bank accounts as the latest Canadian carbon tax rebate was being dispersed. Trudeau proudly declared it's a payment from us that goes out 4 times a year, claiming this rebate offsets the carbon tax burden. The Prime Minister and his allies repeatedly emphasized that 8 out of 10 Canadians receive more back than they pay, positioning the rebate as a key component in making life more affordable. So, Jonathan, how much of a difference has Canada's carbon rebate made for you financially?
The audacity of the man to say that the rebate is a key component in making life more affordable. Look, for me, it's actually worse than most. So I'm definitely the 2 out of 10 because I have small businesses, right? So currently, there's a pot of money sitting on the side that's supposed to go to small businesses. It's already at $5 billion that has not been handed out. So people, I'm sure some will go, okay, well, you'll get your money back. You'll get some. Well, first of all, we know that businesses are not getting as much back as they're putting in, for starters. Second, in June of 2024, in just 1 month, this is the last recorded month, over 5% of businesses in Canada closed in one single month. So that's what's happening in the economy here in Canada.
Do you think that's just because so many businesses have closed that now like 5 businesses closing is 5% of Canadian businesses?
I think this guy's just waiting for the rest of us. It's a war of attrition. I'm going to keep all your money until you all basically go broke. And then, look, at the end of the day, we kind of know that this carbon program is bullshit, right? So it's this whole like, we're going to take your money and give you more back. Well, why don't you just let us keep our own money? Right? Because the knock-on effects within the economy, which the PBO's office has said on multiple reports and multiple occasions, this is a net negative for Canadian citizens, despite what you think you're giving people back, despite what the government thinks they're giving from them. What a gift. So look, if you really want to have a carbon tax, which I don't agree with whatsoever, because they're not even using it to fix the environment, because ultimately I don't think it needs that much work anyway, just take the net amount. Just take the net amount. Don't take all this. What you're doing is you're just creating government bureaucracy and government infrastructure for no good reason. It's absolutely ridiculous. And honestly, saying that you're helping us by giving us a small amount of the money back, that these people are contributing to it, even if some people are getting more back than they're actually contributing in carbon tax, again, just to be clear, they're paying more because they need to purchase goods in the economy. So it is costing them more money. They're paying more taxes to keep these people employed, these government employees that are doing this busy work. So this is a net negative for everybody. So just like it's a big liberal talking point. And they just decide to leave all that out. Like that's not part of the equation. Well, it is, unfortunately. And as a program, as a whole, it's absolutely terrible. But you listen to things like this. This is a key component, they said, in making life more affordable. But Canadians are some of the most taxed citizens in the entire world. I mean, most people have to work till July just to hit their tax freedom day where they can actually make money for themselves. So when you consider this, and then they said something like that, it's like, how out of touch are you? Or how stupid you believe Canadians are? I'm definitely in the 2 out of 10, but I think 10 out of 10 people should definitely push back against this absolutely ridiculous program.
Well, I think Chris Brunette had the best tweet about this, and it went pretty viral. And he just took Justin Trudeau's video and then retweeted it with a picture of Yeonmi Park, who was the woman who escaped North Korea and has become a very famous North Korean dissident, but then put it as if she was saying this. In Canada, the government takes 50% of your income, then returns 1% if you comply. The leader, whose father was also the leader, frames this 1% rebate as a magnanimous gift from him. citizens believe this gift will make the planet slightly colder.
Yeah.
And it's just that line on the end is just so perfect to me, just because it shows the whole insanity and the actual delusion between this, where the liberal government believes like, okay, we can take some, like, let's just do easy arbitrary numbers. I'm going to take $10. It's like they're doing a magic trick and then just like put a hat over it, wave a wand, and they're like, somehow we've got more money now and it's going to be colder. It doesn't make any sense at all. Like the idea that you could tax into prosperity is just insane, but this is what they're trying to do.
That's a really good point. The idea that you can tax into prosperity is insane. Worth repeating.
And even to whenever I saw this, I was like, oh, okay, like whatever, I could use some cash. Like go to look at my bank account, nothing in there. And I was like, oh, okay, what are they saying? I went to the CRA website, logged into my thing, and it's like, sure enough, it's just taken it slightly down off of the thousands of dollars I owe them. I'm like, oh, thank you. You're barely covering my interest payments.
Did you see this? Actually, something popped up the other day, and I think this was something that I don't know how much meat there is on this bone, but it just popped up, and I was like, that the CRA might opt to do everybody's taxes for them. I don't know if it's 100% true. And I thought about it, and I'm like, well, ultimately, they can do anybody's taxes they want by auditing you. So they already have access to these things, right? But the problem you have, though, is the way that they're going to do reporting is they're going to go like you would do your own reporting and you're going to write off X, Y, and Z, small business, whatever it is. You're going to owe them, I don't know, $1,000. They're going to do it. You're going to owe them $10,000. I guarantee you they're always going to lean on the side of the government. And then the other thing, too, is you think about the size of government today. How many more CRA employees do you need now to do everybody's taxes? And you're decimating the economy around bookkeeping and accounting as well. Overall, I hope they don't do it. It just to me shows like, hey, the government is just trying to get more and more involved in your life and take over more and more control of it. And they're all saying, well, it's convenient for you. Don't worry. God, come on.
But then think about this. I agree. If they did it all, it would definitely, you just get hit with worse. But
100%. How are you going to challenge that shit? Like we did the math, bro. Give me the money. I'm like, what? Okay. Like
just think of how taxes currently work, where it's a very common phrase. Taxation is theft. It obviously is. You don't voluntarily give your taxes, but it's also worse than theft. We've said before, where it's more closer to extortion because it's pay us this, or we're going to throw you behind bars for the rest of your life. It's not just theft. But then on top of that, I'm going to make you do the work to figure out how much I'm stealing from you. Like you've got to put the time and resources into sorting out how much we're going to steal from you. It's just insane.
It is absolutely ridiculous. And the carbon tax for me is just kind of one more. It's the icing on the cake, right? The cake, you think about it, like the cake is our brutal tax system to begin with. And this is just the icing on top. But what's funny is what makes a cake look good? The icing. What makes the liberals look really, really bad? The carbon tax. You know what I mean? Like this is one of those things that they are wearing this on their face, and it is egg, and nobody likes it. And liberal MPs are trying to push back against it because they realize like, hey, this is the most unpopular program. And Trudeau just keeps saying like, well, we need to stick with it because we need to change the world. And I'm here for it. And I'm going to keep pushing forward. And you guys just aren't progressive enough. I'm going to progressive himself right out of office.
All right. Well, this actually leads right into our next story, with them claiming that they're making life so much more affordable. So Statistics Canada finds that income inequality in Canada rises to the highest level ever recorded. Income inequality in Canada has reached a record high, with wealth increasingly concentrated among the richest Canadians, according to a new Statistics Canada report. The gap in disposable income between the top and bottom 40% of Canadians has grown to 47 percentage points, the widest since 1999. The wealthiest 20% saw the biggest gains, driven by investment returns, while lower income households struggled due to limited savings. Despite small wage increases, the middle 60% saw their share shrink. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland highlighted government programs to address inequality, while Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre blamed Liberal policies for worsening the wealth gap. So, who or what is to blame for record income inequality levels in Canada?
Okay, so whenever the economy falls apart, there's usually a bit of a shift in terms of wealth because the mechanisms they have to use to level out the economy, whether you're seeing inflation rise or interest rates, kind of go up, that's going to create a bit more of a divide, obviously, right? So in this particular case, though, this can really be pinpointed to Trudeau and the Liberals printing $700 billion over the last 4 or 5 years.
It's like 30% of our money supply.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the big one was when he did 400 to 500 billion during the pandemic. And the reason that was such a problem is because it created a chain of events that really created a significant wealth gap in Canada, which we can obviously see the objective data at this point. So when you printed that kind of money, through the process of quantitative easing, the banks had all this cheap cash. So they basically loaned it out to people that already have amazing credit. And if you saw what happened, if you look at a graph, if someone looks it up, you had corporate ownership of homes in Canada always rising, slowly, but rising on the way up. And then there was an absolute hockey stick effect, exponential growth of corporate ownership of homes. So when that happens and you see the supply demand get all wonky for homes in Canada, prices skyrocketed of homes. We all saw this happen, right? So now you've got massive inflation on people's biggest assets. So when you have this massive inflation, what do they do to try to correct course? Well, they raise interest rates. But there's two things that happen. When you have massive inflation in the market, the people that make money are the people that own all the assets. Again, those are the wealthy people, grocery store owners and such. I just say that because it's something you have to purchase, right? And then also, when you see the corporate home ownership go up, okay, well, now more people are renting. So who owns those? Okay, but now rent prices have gone up. So they're making money there. So again, you're seeing the inflation transfer money from middle class and poor people over to the wealthy. And then the other thing is with interest rates, who has investments? Well, the wealthy people. And when interest rates skyrocket, so do the value of their investments because their return gets higher. So it's really those three things under liberal rule that created this massive, or at least increased this massive gap in wealth. And there's one more thing that I would add in, I think is important, which is mass immigration, right? So when you think about inflation and you think about supply and demand, you think about interest rates, how they're all working together, especially with the housing crisis we have. If you keep adding more people to this country, you keep increasing the demand while we can't keep up with supply, which is keeping prices high across the market for all goods. And again, keeping the interest rates higher to try to balance it out. So ultimately, Pierre Poilievre's right. This is 100% on the Liberals.
I think the point to add too, as well, when it comes to all of the money printing stuff, like this is getting into the weeds of economics a little bit, but it's a very interesting conversation that I think about, which is like, how do humans determine value for something, right? Like we use money as a symbol for value, essentially, because you value $5. Like to you, $5 is the same amount as it is for me.
Sure, it
doesn't change. Yeah. You know, back in the old barter system days, if let's say there was no money and it was like I had to trade my apples for your shoes, like how do I know that you've but like how
don't have the same size feet?
Very true. You know what they say about feet, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, but if
you're trading onions for goats, okay? We're trading onions for goats.
Okay.
Straighten this up.
But if I value onions more than you, then we can't trade that the same, right? So we need something that does that. But so also where I'm getting at with this is like, let's say it's just your grocery store items. Well, if you and I both have $10 and item costs $10 and we're in a bidding match over it, but then the government comes in and just says, here's an extra $10 for both of you. We're just going to use that extra $10 as a way to continue outbidding each other. It's not that we've objectively established that thing is worth $10 and therefore we cut the cap there. And this actually is another point as to why price controls don't work.
Price controls are so dangerous and all these liberals think it's the right solution.
Yeah.
Let's just do price controls on rent. How about don't do that? If you price control one thing, you have to price control everything. And I don't think people understand that. So yeah, sorry, what was your point on that?
No, but that is why price controls are so dangerous, is because value and prices themselves are just a subjective interpretation by buyers and sellers. Like they're constantly putting them up against one another. So for instance, you and I are bidding against something, but then also two businesses are trying to set prices to attract those buyers.
Of course.
And so it's like this is the market ecosystem, right? Where you have to let that process play out.
Yes.
Somebody can't just come in and say that this is what it's worth, this is how much you can buy for it, or this is how much you can sell it for.
People don't realize that when you do that, everything else around it will modify its situation to stable to basically go back to whatever system it was. So some of the other days, well, why don't they just fix the price of rent in commercial businesses? Is what they were saying to me. And it was one of those things. I'm like, well, how would you see that play out? Because right now, if you've got 98% occupancy and a place is worth $10,000 a month, but because of all these other economic factors, in 2 years, you have 80% occupancy and everyone's going bankrupt, Well, now what? Now I still have to pay the 10 grand, even though the market would demand that I only pay 6 or 7. You can't. So what? I only benefit from the downside and the landlord loses out on this? This doesn't make any sense. And when you fix these things too, other things in the market will adjust themselves to make up for these gaps too. Well, then you got to fix the price of onions and goats, and you got to fix, all these other things that you have to let it. You just have to let it live and breathe. And unfortunately, people are going to lose businesses and people are going to fail. We are much better off without government intervention across the board, because like you said, the market doesn't lie. It's a Gary Vee thing. The market doesn't lie. I don't care about your emotions. I love that, because that is the truth. Like, you can think whatever you want about your product, and you can tie yourself into it emotionally as much as you possibly want. But the thing is, if people don't buy your stuff, people don't want your stuff, you fail. The market doesn't care. Just let it be. It's a system that actually works. And then the problem I see, I guess more than anything, is the disparity is always blamed on, through liberals, a lack of government control. But it's always government controls that get us here. It's always those government controls that put us in these situations. Then they're the ones that are like, hey, we've got a great solution. We'll print $400 billion and tell everybody to stay home. Look where that fucking landed us.
Well, even to build on your point there, how long do you think that an economy can last if you've got a government who is regulating it that goes, you were talking about businesses failing and that's just part of the market. Well, what happens if a government takes resources and money from the businesses that do well in order to hand it out to the businesses that don't? Like, you're now creating a system that punishes the productive businesses.
Yes.
And rewards the unproductive ones.
Sounds like our nationalized media programs.
Yeah,
it's exactly what. Dude, this is bananas. Okay, CBC, they get $1.4 billion from Canadians, right? Tell me what you think their television revenue was.
280 something thousand.
How the fuck do you know that? You already had the information.
Because I read our newsletter.
Oh, you're right. God damn it.
$250,000 they take in advertising revenue. And the taxpayers give them $1.4 billion.
Yes. So their percentage of not even profit, obviously, because there's zero, their percentage of revenue generation for the dollars that they receive through television advertising is 0.021%.
That's insane.
And we just keep pumping money into these people and tell us that it's good for Canadians. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Bro. This is bananas. I mean, you look at stuff like that. But look, there's one other big thing that has added to sort of this issue we're having in the market with inflation and with these higher rates. It's government spending, and people may argue, but the thing is, our government spending is 95 to 100% more than what it was before Trudeau got into office. So he's doubled federal spending. And this is insane.
And as Milton Friedman said, every budget is balanced. And so there's only two ways to balance that budget: is to print money to pay off the debts, which again just reduces the purchasing power of your paycheck, or they have to increase taxes, which just takes money off of your paycheck in the future. So either way, no matter what, that balance is going to get that budget is going to get balanced, and it's going to come at the expense of your paycheck. But going to Trudeau in the housing thing as well, going back to these market dynamics, because somebody pointed out to me, I did a rant on how Trudeau said the way that they're going to address housing affordability is lease federal lands to developers.
This is a bad idea,
right? And in that, he's in his announcement, he said, so that we can tell them what housing needs to be built. And so my whole point was, first, the Soviet Union tried this, didn't work. Everybody just got Soviet bloc concrete slab apartments that were depressing.
Yay, everybody's in jail.
Yeah. But then somebody pushed back in the comments of that and said, hey, I normally agree with you. And, it was very respectful. Said, I normally agree with you, but I have to disagree on this one because developers have shown that if just given free rein, they are only going to develop whatever is most profitable to them. And then poor people are still going to get left without housing. And I just said, okay, break down just what you said there, where, okay, put those controls in place. The land that the developer builds on, they don't own, or the people that own the housing. So the government owns that. Mm-hmm. The government tells you what you can build on that land and you can't build. And you're telling them that they have to build and develop in a way that isn't profitable to them. what are they going to do? They're just not going to build or develop.
Of course, you just nationalize housing.
And this is what happens.
Bro.
And this is what happens in every single industry that you try pricing controls on, is you're not just going to see like same thing with the grocery stores. If they say that lettuce can only be sent for $5, you're not going to see all of a sudden $5 lettuce across grocery stores. You're just going to see no lettuce because they're going to go, I don't make money.
I can't make money on this. What am I doing here? And one other thing too with the housing and leasing land versus selling it, that so Pierre Poilievre's plan was to sell Crown land.
Right.
So it's important to know that 88%, only 12% of Canada's land is privately owned. 88% is owned by provincial or federal governments.
Damn.
That is bananas. That's insane to me. So of course you should be selling off Crown land. Here's the thing: you want to balance out the market. Then what you do is you sell the land. You sell it to private individuals, not corporations. They can hire their own developers. That's how you want to chunk it out. No problem. You sell it because if you just, I'll tell you why. Because you can flood the market with land at a fair market rate or just below to try to push prices down, and that's going to create more supply. So you're going to be able to stabilize and lower prices. That's an effective method to lower prices. Now, the thing is, if you just lease it, well, now people can get land for nothing or a small payment every month. So you're disproportionately affecting the market. So if a house costs you $1.5 million and I was going to buy a lot, right, across the ravine or whatever it is, or close by, I'm going to buy a lot for $750,000 and it costs me another $750 to build it. We'll make the math easy. I know it's not exactly like that, but let's just say, so you have a place that's worth 1.5 and I buy land there and I build a home that's also worth about 1.5 million. If I get that piece of property now for $0, because now I'm just leasing it off the government, what does that do to the value of the property surrounding it? The effects of this could be so devastating if enough land is actually leased out. Like it would really, if the bottom would drop out of the market very quickly. Now I might get called out on this because there's probably somebody listening that knows more about economics in this particular arena. But if you just consider this from a supply and demand perspective, because at a certain point, what I'm saying is definitely going to hold true. Because if you, I realize I cherry picked the information to say that it was already in a nice neighborhood and whatever. But in reality, if you flood it with too many things that cost no dollars, you will disproportionately affect everything else around it, everything else sort of in the economy, instead of just selling it at a lower price and then adding some supply to quell it slowly. Because then you're going to have people selling quickly. Like, oh my God, what's going to happen in Canada if I don't sell my house right now? I'm not going to make any money on it. So you could create an absolute frenzy if you do something like that. So again, that's worst case scenario. If they did a lease on the land, if they just were like, flood it, get it all out there. So that's a bit of a concern. But I mean, at the end of the day, I hope they don't do that. And I really don't think it's a good strategy for the government to own your land or anything else whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that is actually one of the scariest parts about it all, is just the idea of being like, the very ground I stand on, like the housing, my shelter is owned by the government.
Right, because like what's happening right now, you look at like you and I have to self-censor. We had to do this through the pandemic. There were certain things we couldn't say. You couldn't say COVID, you couldn't say vaccine. So you just say something else because they were using some sort of AI tool or machine learning tool to censor you. So you would self-censor, you would adjust, or they'd take your toy away, being your however many followers you have, access to your people, right? So it's this thing where if you don't do what you're told, we take your stuff. That's how this goes. But now I live in your home, and maybe it's my home, I don't even know, but it's on your land, right? So at the end of the day, if I don't toe your line, what happens next? This is very social credit system. That's very dangerous and nothing we should be toying with here in Canada.
All right, well, moving on to our next topic, we've got the Trudeau Revolt saga continues. Liberal MPs mount opposition as Trudeau blames non-progressives. Justin Trudeau is facing increasing internal dissent within the Liberal Party, with around 30 MPs reportedly supporting his resignation, including public calls from MPs Sean Casey and Wayne Long. The discontent comes from Trudeau's inability to counter Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's messaging and poor poll results following key by-election losses. Despite the unrest, Trudeau remains committed to his leadership, attributing internal strife to MPs who he claims are not progressive enough to support his agenda. He has doubled down on policies like climate change and diversity, while critics argue his leadership is hindering voter engagement. The leadership debate is expected to intensify as dissatisfaction grows. So are Canadians and political opposition simply not progressive enough to understand all of the wonderful things Trudeau has done for us?
This guy is unhinged. He just is. To continue, like, I'm actually impressed that he's created either such a tight silo or such an ego that he can continue to say these things with a straight face, or in some sense even believe himself. I mean, look, corporations around the world are dropping all these DEI initiatives. You are seeing some schools, like you're seeing a medical school in Quebec, in Ottawa, and another one in Toronto, that are prioritizing up to 75% of their students being from basically diversity hires. Great. And they want to drop merit-based things. They don't need MCATs. Fuck all that. We're just going to let these people, because they've got lived experiences, they should be operating on individuals. Nope, that's super dangerous. That's dumb. So you have a couple that are still doing it, but mainly it's institutions like schools. Corporations are dropping all this stuff immediately. And show me one person who's not a liberal zealot that likes the carbon tax and thinks that it's helping the climate. We all know that it's not. We all know that these liberal approaches to try to fix the world and fix the economy, first of all, none of them are working. You're not doing any of the right things. This whole equality thing, dude, in like 2008, things were pretty good. I think most people would agree, just before obviously the massive economic downturn. But I mean, in terms of society, like everyone had opportunity. I don't think these things were issues. We kind of snuffed a lot of this stuff out since the 60s, 70s, 80s, all the way through. Like growing up for me, I never even thought about race. You're like, oh, you're white. It's like, no, I had friends from all different parts of like all colors of the rainbow. I didn't care if they were gay. I don't care if they're black. I don't care. None of that stuff ever mattered to anybody growing up, but they've made it a problem. These things are making problems. They're not resolving them. You have to be like actively anti-racist against these things, or this whole organization, this DEI mob comes down on you. People just had enough of it, man. People have had enough. And you can see it's like his own MPs, the people in Canada, the people in the United States, people in the West, they've just had enough of this crap. Like it's like I've said before, you can run on a platform of virtue signaling, but you can't govern through virtue signaling, because this is exactly what happens. So I don't know. It's interesting. And one part of me thinks that enough MPs are actually going to stand up and push back. And the other part of me just thinks that this guy's so delusional and so power hungry that there's just no chance. But the nice thing is it ends very poorly for him either way.
So you were mentioning there about how delusional he's become, and I completely agree, and how it's almost impressive. But this is how it historically plays out within authoritarian regimes okay, I've got the policy and the plan to save the world, right? And nothing could go wrong with this plan because my intentions are so pure. So when you start implementing that plan and it has negative consequences, your aides and the people around you will start letting you know about this, right? So this was something that would have happened in like Stalin's Soviet Union or Mao's communist China whenever famines started like mass crazy. Hey, our collectivization policies aren't working and everybody is actually starving. And then what ends up happening is Mao or Stalin would punish those people for bringing up that information. Like, this is your fault. Like my plan is so genius. It's up to you. You guys aren't implementing it right. Fuck you. And then what ends up happening is those people just stop bringing up bad news to you.
Of course.
And then so then they just start feeding you. Like for a good portion of time, the people closest to Hitler were like, yeah, we're doing great on all fronts. And they were actually just getting crumbled because he would just lose his mind if they told him anything different. And so this is what happens within these regimes. And so it was just, with all the foreign interference stuff that we'll talk about in a second, just came out that breaking, Trudeau admits missing at least 5 crucial reports or memos intended for him to authorize defense briefs to MPs about foreign interference. And then also Trudeau aides were saying that, yes, sensitive documents and important documents weren't being given. But either way, just the point stands about like, this is how delusion within political realms fostered.
Right. What's funny though is why I can't give him any credence here, or credit rather, is he also came out today and said, well, the conservatives are the ones that are traitors.
Right.
No, we know for sure it's them. It's the conservatives. Like, bro, you're the one.
Even think within these aides, right? Like Trudeau sitting there, hey, we're under fire for a lot of this foreign interference stuff. What the hell's going on? Well, Mr. Trudeau, it's actually the conservatives, and like they can make him happy. I don't know. He probably, I think he's probably squirming his way around and knows actually what's going on, and he's just, bending it to his benefit, but still crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I mean, back to this whole like, are Canadians just simply not progressive enough? At the end of the day, Canadians have just had enough of his progressive policies, and they've just had enough of this guy running this country. Look, at the end of the day, people want everyone, like by and large, people actually do want equality of opportunity. People do want you to have a good life. People want you to be safe. People want you to be happy. People want you to do things that make that fulfill your life. That most people want that for other people. You know what I mean? Like if you think about it, most people are good with that. And they don't care if you, whatever it is you like to do. They don't care what you're into. They don't care. People just don't care. Leave them alone, like live and let live. That's how most people see the world. So a lot of these policies, if they just stopped, I don't know how many like goalposts ago, people would be, yeah, that's fine. But the problem you get with a lot of this stuff now is, like I was talking to someone the other day, lifelong liberal. They're like, yeah, I was at the gay pride parade this year and I'll never go again. It was just naked men running around and my children were around. He's like, this is the most preposterous thing ever. He's like, what does that have anything to do with this? And I realize I'm using one example that might bother some people, but it's a good one because it just shows that there is no goalpost. They just keep moving it further up and further up and further up. And that's what's happened with a lot of these policies. And that's why people are fed up with it. But the other side of this too is the reality is that the liberals have run the country into the ground. So you can't deny politics anymore. A lot of times you go, well, whatever, those guys are going to get naked at a parade. I'm just not going to go. I don't give a shit. That was actually my old mentality. But now that people are going, oh, but I can't afford groceries and I can't afford rent and now I can't buy a home anymore. Something's got to change. So the foundational components of what creates sort of a successful society, those are actually what's gone and why people want him out of here. It has nothing to do with these policies. He just uses this as a smokescreen, in my opinion.
One thing that Orwell noted really well that builds on your whole point there about the goalpost just continuing to move is that one does not establish the dictatorship to safeguard the revolution, but rather starts the revolution in order to establish a dictatorship. So the perpetual nature of the revolution is needed in order to continue consolidating power.
Yeah.
And so that's why the goalposts keep moving, is because if they say at any point, all right, we've hit our goal, we're where we need to be in equality and progress and diversity and climate change, then the dictatorship has to end.
You're right. That's exactly what it is. Oh, it's dangerous times.
All right, next story we've got. Feds expel Indian High Commissioner and 5 other diplomats for alleged role in murder on Canadian soil. Canada expelled 6 Indian diplomats, including High Commissioner Sanjay Kumar Verma, following threats linked to Indian government officials targeting public safety. The RCMP issued a rare public warning after discovering that Indian diplomats were involved in covert activities, including gathering intelligence through proxies, with pro-Palestine movement members being primary targets. Indian officials refused to cooperate with Canadian law enforcement, leading to further police warnings. In retaliation, India expelled 6 Canadian diplomats and denied Canada's claims, calling them baseless. This deepened the diplomatic rift, with Canada maintaining it has irrefutable evidence of India's involvement in a Canadian citizen's murder. So is this the beginning of the end for Indian and Canadian relations?
Yeah, it's probably the end of Trudeau and India's relationship. But as far as Canada and India go, I don't think so. I think you need to see a change of the guard, right?
I mean, Canada is India now.
Yeah. In a reasonable portion. I think you have to just consider how, there's a pretty deep relationship with trade and with everything else that sort of transcends the current political leaders. And I believe that whoever's in power for next for Canada and India, this stuff will be moved aside. They'll figure it out. They'll talk through it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it looks pretty clear that India was involved in these killings in Canada, and I'm not by any means condoning that or saying that that's okay. However, you look at how the United States operates. You know what I mean? And how they're doing things like this all over the world. And again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but they still work with these other countries. They still find ways to trade and do this other stuff. So my point is not to say that any of it's right. And I think that Trudeau's got himself in a situation where he needs to create a diversion. So I think that's why he's focusing on this and why he's blaming the Conservatives for being treasonous. I think that's what he's doing. He's trying to make noise over here because that's usually his plan. Well, I'll make louder noise over here, and then you guys will forget about this. That's kind of his playbook. So I also think that they're in so deep here that they can't really back out. They can't really, despite the evidence they have. I don't think they have any choice but to continue moving forward here. But again, I really believe this is isolated. This is siloed with the current leaders. And I think as soon as either one of them changes, definitely Trudeau. Actually, if you had a new Indian leader right now, I don't think it would change much. But once Trudeau's gone, if Modi's still in power, I imagine they'll find some balance. And when Modi's gone and we have another Canadian leader, then 100% they will. The only way you might not see it is, and this is a bit of a, I don't even know why I'm running away with this, but I will because now I'm talking about it, is India's kind of a bit of a neutral state in terms of which side they're on. East and West, they kind of benefit from both sides. And you are seeing sort of this divide between East and West. And you're seeing this sort of World War III kind of continue to sort of simmer over, right? So when you think about China and Russia, Iran, Middle East, a lot of that, so that's kind of your East. And then you look at your West, which is primarily NATO, right? Europe, United States, NATO, stuff like that. So India's kind of playing both sides a little bit, especially like they're part of BRICS. They're on the fence. And I think what they'll do is if they have to choose, I think it's pretty clear that they'll go East. That to me, that's what I see. I could be wrong, could be nuanced, and there's some things that I may not know, but I could see that being the case. And if that ends up happening, then yeah, Canada and India may be far apart for a very long time, but it wouldn't necessarily be because of this. So anyway.
So I just did a big breakdown and article and rant about this. You can find it on our Substack. So, but I'll give the Coles notes. However, if you want to dive in deeper, you can go read it on our Substack. But this goes back for years and years as to why these tensions are increasing. And so in 2010, Harper first tried putting forward free trade agreements with India, largely to success, and they started implementing them. They also started, Canada was, through Harper, was going to start selling uranium to India for their nuclear program. Now, I kind of have a weird issue. I don't know. It doesn't make much sense to me that Canada is like, no, we have no interest in being a nuclear power, but we're also going to help other nations build nuclear arms. I don't really see why that's a good
fair
thing.
Point.
But anyways, so relations between India and Canada were very good under Harper. Once Trudeau came in 2016, he pretty much put those free trade agreements on the back burner and didn't say, no, we're not working with you anymore, but just pretty much ignored them and didn't do anything of that nature. But then in 2018 was when things really hit the fan. Trudeau went to India and he had dinner with he invited a Khalistani terrorist who has been convicted of terrorism to have dinner with him. And so that set off India, because the thing with Khalistan is that Khalistan is a Sikh movement within India that seeks to establish independence between essentially India and Pakistan. They want to carve out a middle portion and be like,
they're separatists. They're India's Quebec.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And
I shouldn't say that. I just mean the fact that they want to separate.
And but between the 1980s to about the mid 1990s, 20,000 people died because of the Khalistanis, because of insurgencies.
Yeah.
There was one famous one in I believe it was the 90s where they hijacked a plane and it ended up killing 350 people.
That's wild.
So very legitimate terrorist organization. Yeah. And so, how do you expect that not to cause issues when you're going to India and then meeting with terrorists that are actively hostile
trying to
India?
overthrow the government, essentially. Well,
exactly.
Create their own overthrow.
So of course that's going to cause diplomatic frustrations. But then it also got, after that, Canada and India were like, okay, we're at least going to join in together for counterterrorism operations. And Canada was like, yep, cool, we'll help you deal with the Khalistanis. But then immediately after that, Trudeau started erasing Khalistani extremism from official memos and all of this kind of stuff. So, parental rights advocates are extremists in Canada, but Khalistanis aren't. And then, so that again set off tensions with India. They were like, hey, what the fuck? You said you were going to work with us on this. And then in 2021, it got worse again when Trudeau signed his coalition with Jagmeet Singh, because Jagmeet Singh has openly spoken at Khalistani rallies and panders to their base and is part of their movement, essentially.
Yeah. He's not banned from India, but he's there seems to be so that was something that was floating around, he's banned. He's not banned from India, but there seems to be a mutual understanding like, hey, don't come here.
And well, they were denying his visa. So it's not like an official ban.
No.
But he was like, hey, can I come? And they were like, no.
Nah, we don't want to. But exactly.
And then so when that coalition formed, India again was like, what the fuck? Like now you're shaking hands with in working with a group or a leader that is openly advocating for this movement.
Yes.
And then, so you know what? There is very much something to say about, it looks like India could have very well played a part in this assassination.
It seems that way, but.
So you can for sure criticize India and be like, hey, you're killing a Canadian citizen.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do something about that as
100%,
Canada.
100%.
However, I think there's also a valid point to be made on the other side is going, why is Canada giving citizenship to terrorists?
Yeah,
in the first place?
We just like to do that in general.
Yeah.
So
sure, the Palestinian movement in Canada hasn't boiled over into violence yet.
Yes.
But actually, Media Bergen, I think his name is on Twitter. He's like a young reporter and he does investigative journalism. And he's been covering the Palestinian movement because there's been massive protests for them in Canada.
Right.
They're actively trying to push forward this movement here. And he's had death threats from this group. Like they're like, hey, we'll fucking kill you for filming us. So they definitely have violent intentions, essentially. And so, it's like, why are we harboring these movements? Why are we just allowing these things to take place into our country? And the last important piece of that whole puzzle as well is Pakistan is funding and supporting these Khalistani movements in Canada as a way to destabilize India.
Right.
So, of course, India is going to sit here and be like, again, this isn't condoning them carrying out criminal activities in Canada. But if for over a decade, you're saying, hey, we really need your help dealing with this problem. We need your help dealing with this problem and trying to do it diplomatically for almost a decade. And you continue to actually allow this movement to fester.
Yes.
Like, of course, you're going to push them into a corner.
Well, you're kind of hostile at that point. Like, I get it. But again, I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying. I didn't have that depth of knowledge, of course, but it just seems it seems so obvious with Trudeau these days, but this is an issue that Trudeau's created that I think dies with Trudeau primarily. I understand that there's a mess to clean up and maybe Jagmeet Singh as well. I don't see him much. I don't know how long he sticks around either. But that's kind of where this issue falls flat once they're out of the equation. So again, to your point, is this the end of Indian-Canadian relations? For now, but I think it'll probably rekindle once Trudeau's out of office.
Well, and you see him, you mentioned earlier, pointing out now, conservatives are foreign interference and they're compromised by India, because I think it's very, I agree that India is probably financing conservative leadership. There was a CSIS report saying that India was buying memberships in order to favor Polyev and to undermine Patrick Brown.
Yep.
But you're like, again, it doesn't mean that Polyev has to be sitting there shaking their hands and being like, I'm going to work with you. But when you've got a regime in Trudeau and Singh who are actively hostile to your nation, essentially, like, of course you're going to try to get the other guy in office.
That makes sense. Yeah, even though I don't agree with it, but it does make sense. And I think that's also why you see China's allowed to operate their criminal enterprise in Canada under liberal rules. So for them, it makes sense. So that's where their interests lie. So I totally see it. And again, I'm going to dig in a little more on this, like, actual conservative foreign interference, because I don't think it's what they're saying it is, especially considering they don't have any power. Like, they don't have the power. So, I mean, it's such a long play to even be involved in. At what point?
It's a bad investment.
Exactly. Like, what's the risk reward at that point? You know what I mean? So I kind of see that as like, well, maybe, but it's more likely at this point that they're doing it without many of the conservatives having any idea, just by kind of skirting the rules the way they can without directly involving the politician. Again, not a good thing, but they're not complicit. That's all.
Yeah, and somebody pushed back actually on our last episode when we loosely brought up this topic, and they're like, I guess we see where the line gets drawn. Like, if it's conservatives, it doesn't matter. And again, the point isn't that it doesn't matter. Like, yes, you don't want foreign interference in your elections and processes by any means, and you should try to stop that. But the difference the point that we were making in that last podcast that I hope, is clear through here as well, is that, like, You should try to stop all foreign interference, but there's an ethical difference between what we know Trudeau has done with CCP affiliates, where they're directly in the party, working in the party. The politicians are knowingly working for Beijing's,
working with them. Exactly.
And then you've got Indian diplomats essentially behind curtains tossing money to people that might.
There's a big difference between knowingly and unknowingly. And the same thing goes for like even Patrick Brown. He's losing that battle. Unknowingly, he may not understand, but he can't do anything about it. It's that there's a level of election interference that exists beyond the politician's power to control. That's the part that we as a society might want to try to tighten up and fix. We can't blame the politician directly. It's when it's inside the sphere of the politician's ability to actually manipulate what's happening. That's when it's a really, really big problem, regardless of what party they're working with. So just to clear that up.
Yeah. And I guess, the last thing I'd say here is I do think the same standard applies. We've talked about how any traders should lose all of their assets and exile to the forest.
In the forest.
Nineveh.
Yeah,
you're exiled to Nineveh.
Yeah, we're taking all your shit,
I don't care what party they're from. If it does turn out that that conservative politicians are knowingly undermining Canada for India.
Get the fuck out of here, bro.
Yeah,
no chance. No one. There's not one person in the world that should be able to see their way through that and still run a country. I don't care. No matter if it's your own mom. Get out of here.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story, we've got Samadoun, from death to Canada to terrorist organization. Samadoun, an anti-Israel group tied to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP, has been officially designated a terrorist entity by both Canada and the US. The designation follows incidents like the Vancouver rally marking the anniversary of the Hamas attacks, where Samadoun members chanted "Death to Canada" and burned a Canadian flag. The group defends its actions as part of an anti-imperialist agenda to dismantle Canada's colonial and capitalist systems. Conservative leaders Pierre Poilievre and John Rustad urged for this designation, while Canada's public safety minister emphasized the importance of this move in combating terrorism. So, has Canada passively allowed terror entities to take root in the country?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how you'd qualify passively versus actively. Because as soon as you know about something, are you really just being passive? Or are you actively letting it happen?
Yeah.
As soon as you know.
Especially if all onus is on you. Like, you're the only person that can do something about it, which is the government.
I would suggest that they're actually complicit in letting a lot of these things happen. Look, I think you just need to have more objective, clear information. I think you just need to have more objective parameters on how to qualify these terrorist groups. And if they check these boxes, there's no question we're done. Because look, you can have them from all sides. You can support Israel and you can support Palestine. It doesn't really matter. Take your pick. But you can also have groups on both sides doing things that are bringing terror to Canada, right? So, and I mean that, like, genuinely. I don't know that there are any coming from Israel. There may be. I don't know. But I can tell you right now with this group, obviously the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine connection here, and I know that the leader of that, or the guy that started this, may be involved in that group. He's also now on the terror watch list or whatever it is. He's listed as a terrorist in Canada. What is their stated goal is basically is death to Canada. Flip Canada on its head. Forget all this anti-imperialist agenda they're trying to push through and dismantle Canada's colonial capitalist systems. This is Canada. If people are here and they're an organized group of people that are trying to overthrow the very small culture or system that we have in this country, because I know it's pretty much for sale at all times. We designate these people terrorist groups and we stop them. And the thing is, it's not unprecedented because we do it all the time. Like they qualified the Proud Boys as a terrorist group, a few years back. No complaints. No one really complained. I don't even know enough about that group. To my understanding, I am not trying to defend that group. But if you had clear parameters on what they're trying to do to Canada, because we're qualifying them as terrorist groups in this country, would Proud Boys in Canada actually meet that threshold? I don't know, but my suspicion is no. I could be totally wrong here, But again, we haven't set up the parameters. But if you kind of look at that, if it's to ruin the system in Canada and bring this country down, which is what these people have basically said, death to Canada, it's pretty clear they got to go. But because they sort of fell under the liberal umbrella of what's acceptable, it took this long. And this is how all these things seem to happen. It's very politicized. It's not objective. And maybe I'm being an idiot for saying, hey, these things should be objective and not politicized, considering there's a political group here. And look, maybe I'm being idealistic to believe that we could just have an objective system that is not partisan in any way. Because anytime you have a political leader that is, maybe sympathetic to one cause versus another because it helps him with his base and helps him generate votes, they're going to lean one way or the other. But maybe this is one of those things that shouldn't be like that. Maybe this is one of those things that should be like, hey, anti-competitive behavior in Canada gets reviewed. And if they have that then they get fined if they're guilty of it. You know what I mean? Like maybe it should be objective. Like if these people do these things, if they check these boxes, they got to go, right? So anyway, I think they've actively done it. I think it's gotten a lot worse under Trudeau. And, I'm going to give the guy a bit of a break here. I don't necessarily think it's gotten worse under Trudeau because he's sympathetic to their cause. I think it's gotten really bad under Trudeau because he's basically left our border wide open and it's allowed these things to come to Canada. And I also think that we've made the mistake of, kind of living in this world where anybody that's an immigrant, anybody that's BIPOC, anybody that's kind of falls under the DEI umbrella, we give them a lot more flexibility than we give other people. And I think it allows these things to fester a little more.
There is no legal objective definition of terrorism. People debate it all the time, but essentially what terrorism boils down to is using violence against innocents or civilians in order to create fear to achieve a political goal. So you're attacking innocent people to achieve a political goal. So yeah, who knows whether I don't know enough about them to know whether they meet that criteria. But however, there is definitely a lot of organizations within Canada at the moment that use, even if it's not physical violence, they are using intimidation tactics in order to achieve a political goal. So they are trying to target innocent people. You see this all the time when they go through, say, Jewish communities or they attack Jewish businesses. But I remember saying like 8 months ago on this podcast that like this movement has nothing to do with Palestine and it is going to just devolve into an attacking the West.
Yes.
Which they say, death to Canada, death to America, death to Israel. It's any Western nations, any colonial nations. I said this from the beginning that I could see where this was going, that it was this sentiment that was underlying this entire movement. And they were just using this Palestine situation as a way to direct it into first get moral virtue and like get celebrated for being so moral and caring so much. But then also it just acts as the perfect disguise for what they really want to do, which is destruction.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, that's a fair point. I think actually, I did a little bit of research on the Proud Boys while we were chatting there. Help you kind of better understand. I kind of still don't know if you would actually qualify them as a terrorist group, even after reading this. I thought it'd be more clear. But again, it didn't comport with the liberal narrative for sure. And I know there's always bad actors, so whatever, but for what it's worth. The Proud Boys are a far-right all-male organization founded in 2016 by Gavin McInnes, a Canadian-British writer and commentator. The group presents itself as a pro-Western fraternal organization and claims to support values like free speech and small government, but it has gained notoriety for its involvement in political violence, promotion of white nationalist ideas, and anti-immigrant, anti-feminist rhetoric. Members of the Proud Boys often describe themselves as Western chauvinists who oppose political correctness and embrace a hyper-masculine identity. In Canada, the Proud Boys were officially designated a terrorist group in February of 2021. The designation followed their role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, where members of the group were part of the violent mob attempting to overturn the U.S. election results. Canadian officials labeled the Proud Boys as a terrorist organization due to their consistent involvement in activities linked to right-wing extremism, violent political action, and attempts to undermine democratic processes. Would you qualify them as a terrorist group in Canada?
I don't think it really matters whether they're in Canada or not. It's just whether they're a group that tries to use violence in order to achieve political means. And so depending on what their involvement was in January 6th, I think maybe, they could potentially fall under that, because if, let's say, they were the group that was trying to rile people up and actually bring them to that, to create violence in order to get that political change, I think they could fit that distinction.
Yeah, fair enough. You know what? You actually made a really good point there that I wasn't thinking about when we've been discussing this. The groups don't necessarily have to be in Canada.
Yeah.
Obviously. So I totally agree with that. You know, we just designated Hamas a terrorist organization. They're not in Canada either. So when I was talking about that, it was more the homegrown stuff like we're seeing here. That's actually what I meant. But I think it's important to make that designation. That's actually a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that they could definitely be on the list for sure. I just don't know. Again, this is why if you had some sort of objective framework to be like, hey, if you do this, this is the group you fall under. Bottom line, easy. That's easy as pie. This is what we do. Now, sure, you can manipulate information and manipulate the media and kind of stoke fire in situations to try to categorize people as such. But at least this way, I know there's no partisanship in any of this at any real scale. Yes, there'll always be a little for sure, but you can kind of look at the filter of, hey, we qualified these people as a terrorist organization because of these things, and I know they meet that criteria. Cool, I'm comfortable with that. You know what I mean? Then you don't let these things don't fester, because it'd be simple. Look, you could even have the official opposition or the conservatives come up and say, look, because Pierre Poilievre has been going on about this group for a while, right? So if he just said, look, guys, this is clear as day. Here's the boxes they check. We're done. Just let's get done with this. Instead, it festered for how many more months, right?
Right. I think something that's really interesting as well is, we're talking about an objective standard to meet for terrorism, but seeing how our countries or Western countries selectively apply whether somebody is a terrorist. There's a saying that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right?
That's a very fair point.
And so what's interesting is you look at, okay, let's say you look at these fighters in the Middle East.
Who's qualified the IDF as a terrorist organization? So I guarantee probably Iran has.
Yeah. So, we know Al-Qaeda carried out 9/11, obvious terrorist entity, right? But go back to the 1980s when the CIA was funding the Mujahideen, who would later rebrand themselves as Al-Qaeda. They were teaching them how to fight the Soviet Union, giving them weapons. And then even, this is a really crazy Easter egg to show how the CIA is definitely involved in Hollywood to some degree, is I believe it's at the end of Rambo 3, the credits at the end of the movie say this movie was dedicated to our brave brothers fighting in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen. So when the point that I'm trying to make here is that if it is a violent group that is fighting a regime that America doesn't like, they're freedom fighters. Yeah. If they're a violent regime that is fighting, they're a violent group fighting a regime that America does like, they're terrorists. So it's like, it's not really about the objective actions as much as is their violence beneficial to our means?
Well, I still think you can use objective metrics.
Yeah.
I still think you can use objective metrics. That's important because even if you've decided, hey, these are good guys, these are bad guys, well, how bad are they? Is it just free speech? Is it just because they think differently than you? Does that make them a terrorist? No, they got to still check these boxes. So I still think the objectivity part is holds true, however you quantify that. But yeah, good point. like really good point. Way to flip this whole thing on its head, being like, oh, they're just all terrorists. Fuck. Well, I agree with you though. It's just like we pick and choose who's good and who's bad. But if you look at their actions, it's kind of like, America says they're the good guy, but
like a great example is like, you take away our understanding of the world and then you just map the exact same scenario onto something, your emotions around it completely change. Like,
yeah.
Like anybody who's seen the movie Dune, I think you've seen Dune, right?
Yeah.
The Fremen are a terrorist organization, essentially. They hide out in the mountains and they use guerrilla tactics to carry out violence.
But they seem like the underdog.
Exactly. You're rooting for them the whole time.
Yeah.
So even in the second movie, the guy...
I haven't seen that one yet. No spoilers.
Okay, but even at one point, he says, this isn't a spoiler, but somebody says to him, he goes like, how have you been like this effective? And he says like, fear is our only tool. And so like he's literally saying like we're terrorists essentially.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a bigger moral question on right and wrong and this side versus that side. And you and I've had these conversations a lot of times. When you see these wars, there's no good guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's not really. I just feel bad for the soldiers and the innocent people that are dying. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I guess then the nation has to decide whose side they're on, and then they're going to use our objective metrics that we just made up. All right. We did not solve all of the world's problems today. That's basically where we just landed. Cool, man.
But before moving on to the next topic, I just wanted to point out two more things about, especially the pro-Palestine movement within Canada. So did you see that the protesters actually attacked Trudeau's convoy the other night?
No.
Yeah. Pro-Palestine protesters mobbed the RCMP and they actually ended up having to retreat. Can you imagine if the Freedom Convoy did that?
Oh, God, no. This whole country would be locked down. Everyone's bank accounts would be frozen.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Everybody's.
Yeah. And so, but then this, not a peep on
we would
the
have a military state.
Yeah.
Except we don't have a big enough military, so we'd be fucking fine.
And then the last thing I saw this week that was hilarious in regards to the pro-Palestine stuff is a protester went up to a restaurant and started ripping down flags and being like, "Fuck you, you colonials," all this whatever stuff, right? Turned out they were Greek flags. They
that's
blue
so
and
tight.
white, and they just didn't even know what an Israeli flag looked like.
So good. That's so perfect.
So again, really goes to show, these people, it's not about the move. It's not actually about the issue. It's about giving them license to act like pieces of shit. All right, last topic for the day, the fight against hopelessness. So you and I were in a conversation recently, and we kind of went exchanged thoughts with some people within this in the same space as us, essentially. And just, I think you and I both kind of walked away with a similar feeling where it's like, look, there's more than enough bad stuff happening in the world, and you and I really like to focus on it. But it really goes to show, like, just because there's bad things that happen, like, I don't think that means that you should be hopeless. And I think like that actually only plays into their hand. So like I was thinking about this and just kind of formulated this from a bunch of different perspectives from philosophers, but like, hopelessness is a poison that paralyzes action by convincing us that our efforts are futile. When we surrender to despair, we hand power to the very forces we despise, allowing corruption and authoritarianism to thrive unchecked. Choosing the black pill, the belief that nothing can improve, only perpetuates this cycle. True progress doesn't require eradicating evil overnight. It's found in the small victories. Every step forward, even a 1% improvement, or simply holding the line against further decay, is a monumental win worth celebrating, for it proves the fight is still alive. And then, so I guess the question here would be: are you more or less hopeful about the future than you were 2 years ago?
So I think that is a multi-layered question and answer. So when you think about sort of the world at scale, whole world, I'm currently a little less hopeful than I was 2 years ago because the world wars, global economy, the effort for global governance, the AI and where it looks like it may be going, and how other countries are definitely going to be bad actors with a lot of it. How many more secrets I know the government's keeping, stuff like that. So when I look at it at scale, I'm a little less hopeful. But that has to do directly with my ability to impact it, right? So I'll continue going on. If I look at Canada, I'm actually more hopeful because I know that Trudeau's reign is coming to an end. I know that people are waking up. I know more people are paying attention. I know more people care. I know more people are being affected, unfortunately, but therefore are putting their foot down. I've also seen things are also starting to kind of go back the other way a little bit too. Like, you and I talk about the economy, but interest rates are dropping, inflation is dropping. Sure, we've still got mass migration issues and stuff like that, but they're kind of backtracking on that as well. And so for me, I do think that Canada is slowly moving in the right direction. I think about my life now as I left the big city. I'm in a smaller town now. It has been significantly better. I like it so much more. Everybody's friendly. Everybody's super nice everywhere you go. That's been great for me
too.
Yeah. He's not so bad. So you see a lot of like that, and that's just the geography. Now I dig in a little more to my life. Like my life has continued to get better. Ever since I had my first kid in June, my life has gotten significantly better in every way. And maybe it's because I got my shit together a little more. Maybe it's because I kind of moved a lot of the noise out of my life. Those things you let fester for a long time, like, oh, I'm behind on corporate taxes, or, oh, I got to do this or that, or clean the garage, or fix this up, or whatever it is, do that renovation. I don't know whatever people got to get done, fix the car. I took care of all that shit. So I had no noise in my life. So that's been like, think about that over the last couple of years. That's been amazing. My relationship with my wife, it continues to get better every year. We always just get better. I have better friends in my life. I have better business opportunities. I'm doing things right now that, as a young entrepreneur, I only dreamed of doing. Sure, I've got the hooks in me from my last, entrepreneurial journey because the government shut a lot of my businesses down. But where I'm going, it's like I've grown a set of wings now. I'm moving in such an exceptional direction. So personally, and on the closer I get to my heart, the closer I get to home, the better things are getting and the more hope I have over the last 2 years, which I think is important, But it's also like when you think about this from maybe a more political perspective, because the conversation we were having, I think people get desolate, and I think they do that because they over-associate with being in that position. They over-associate with maybe being the victim for that reason. Well, you and I don't do that. I'm not a victim. I don't feel like a victim. I realize that, look, maybe I don't trust the political system, and you have to choose between two bad options, but that's the way it goes. And, you made this point yourself. At least we're moving the things in the right direction. So, I think that overall, with the things that I can affect in my life, I would say that I'm significantly more hopeful.
Yeah, and even if you think about it like kinetic warfare, like let's say it's a trench warfare, like and you're getting attacked and you're under assault, if you just hold that line and it doesn't even move, even if you're not making progress, even if you're not pushing them forward, like that is still something to be like, all right, we're in a good position here.
That's a good point, actually. Sorry to cut you up, but I do want to say the reason I feel like Canada's getting better, that's a really good, you just sort of, a light bulb went off in my head, is we were under attack for a very, very, very long time. Ever since the pandemic, even before then a little bit, but really the onslaught was heavy for several years. For 4 years, we were basically under attack from our government. But now they can't keep their foot on the gas because they don't have that same kind of support. So now instead of just holding the line like we were doing, now the country feels like it's making progress. We're pushing the line back the other way. Sorry, continue.
No, it's okay. And you know what? I didn't connect it to, say, a victim mentality as much as I connected it to utopian thinking. So,
okay.
So just like how these people go, well, unless, like, say the social justice types go, well, unless everybody has the same exact amount and equal amount, then we're living in an oppressive tyranny and everything should be burned to the ground in order, unless we have equality, right?
Yeah.
So unless it's perfect, fuck it all is their idea, essentially, right? It was very similar on the opposite end, which I was kind of getting from this, where it's like, oh, unless there's zero corruption, unless there's zero authoritarianism, unless our institutions are working exactly as they're intended to be, then fuck it all.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Even if, like, I think it was Michael Malice, I heard make this point once, where, like, even as an anarchist, right, he doesn't even believe that the government should exist at all. But then you put him in a scenario where he's like, even when, say, weed was decriminalized, like, that is worth celebrating. Like, it's even an inch in that right direction.
Yes.
Where people now aren't being locked behind bars for their entire lives. Like, I don't need to get rid of the whole machine as long as, like, there's just a little less damage happening. And so, like, I don't know, that was just a very big takeaway from all of that with me. Like, obviously, like, still everyone seemed like a great person, but I was just like, a lot of people in that scenario would say, listen to somebody like that. And I think this also comes down to trying to get, say, the people who are still quote unquote asleep or not on board with a lot of, say, the things you and I talk about, is like, to get them on board, you can't just go like doom orgy them.
You can't full black pill. Yeah. You just
like,
can't.
You're not going to win anyone.
No, you just can't. Exactly. Like, no one joins your cause, essentially. And then you have to ask why you're doing it. And it just makes me go, oh, that's an individual fight that you want to keep fighting. And that's why you associate with that. Like, maybe not victimized, but you built your identity around it. Maybe not a victim, but you built your identity around this fight. So you can't let it go as an individual. So you don't even care about recruiting people to fix the problem.
Right.
Now
it's like somebody is in that trench on the front lines, and then you've just got a couple people being like, why are we even firing bullets? That guy took one to the head, like, fuck all this. And you're just like, well, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse if that's the mentality.
Exactly. So the question is, are you more or less hopeful about the future than you were 2 years ago?
I'm more, for sure, just because of, like, I genuinely believe that my number one concern is totalitarianism. Like, no matter in which form it comes, whether it's like fascism or communism or any, like, in wokeism is definitely in a totalitarian ideology.
Yeah.
And so, like, for the last, say, up until about like 2022, 2023, most likely, like for sure, there seemed like there was no end to that snowball. Like it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and to the point where, you know, you were arguing about trans stuff and like, you're like, what if I just don't think somebody chopping their dick off makes them a woman, that like I'm now an evil person? Like this is a scary place we're getting to within society. But now I just see, like, even the other night was having a conversation with a couple family members who were never deep into this stuff, and I was talking to them about the immigration issue, and they wouldn't have questioned it at all, like, a couple years ago.
Right.
But even now they're like, yeah, this is getting out of control. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So just being able to see that more people essentially being receptive to being like, I think I was lied to about a lot of shit, then that to me is hopeful, because as long as there's that kind of freedom of perspective and people able to change their perspective, then like totalitarianism dies. So that to me is hopeful.
2 for hope.
There you go.
Let's go.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can find exclusive podcast episodes, original articles, and a direct line to Jonathan and myself, all for just $5 a month. And it very much helps support this show, as we are up against Trudeau's billion-dollar propaganda machine, and it keeps independent media rolling. So thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.